Okay, so this is for assignment 8.01, and this is getting into some of those more modern art movements that you're learning about. So, in this assignment, you were asked to pick an artwork from either the Surrealism movement, the De Stijl movement, or the Bauhaus movement. So I'm going to just touch on just some general style characteristics in each of those. And then hopefully, if you haven't done so, you can add some of these style connections to the artwork that you had selected. So we're going to start first with the surrealism style characteristics. Now, out of all three of these movements, you're probably the most familiar with surrealism, as one of the most famous artists across the world is Salvador Dali. And he was a big name. He had the whole idea of the melting clocks, and it was a unique movement as it brought up some new ideas that were not explored before in artists. Okay, so let's just define that real quick. It takes realistic imagery and presents it in unrealistic ways. For instance, this is one of Salvador Dali's. The clock is a realistic imagery. The landscape or terrain is a realistic imagery. These shapes, these rectangles are realistic imagery, but the way that he's presenting it in a way that does not make logical sense. And it's unreal with what it's being able to do, such as a clock being malleable that can fold and bend. This one here is done by Rene Magritte. And so if we look at it, the buildings look realistic. The men here, the figures are realistic, but he's making it in a way that is unrealistic. It could not happen. It transcends reality, where all of these men are kind of falling like rain. Okay, so that's what surrealism does. So it is grounded in the idea of realism, with the terms of the objects, but how we're seeing it is very much unrealistic. And it was more about the imagination and letting loose and expressing the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is the mind of when we're not thinking logically or we're not thinking rationally, but we just kind of, let loose in those random thoughts that kind of come in. Say, kind of like daydreaming or when you're sleeping, and it looked heavily towards the psychology of dreams. So I know Dali and many of the other surrealist artists were very influenced by Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was the man who was really pioneering what dream interpretations meant. Looking at if I dream about a horse, what does that mean? Or colors, or even just how in our dream state we have a lot of things that just don't make sense. We're either floating in sky or we transcend real time, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the foundation of realism. And then because they're interpreting dreams, a lot of times with surrealist artists, there's a lot of use of symbolism or metaphors. So, in Dali in particular, when you see ants, that means something, or the clock, or his deformed self portrait. Very much the same with Rene Magritte, as he tries to also include like a trickery of the eye in his works. But so if you chose an artwork from Surrealism, make sure that you actually look up that particular artwork and figure out what is some of the metaphors or symbolism used in the work. Okay. The next one is de stijl, style characteristics, and de stijl just means simply the style. And so, the one key artist that's really known for de stijl is Pete Mondrian. And Pete Mondrian is known for his grid squares. And many of you are like, oh, that seems is easy. What's so special about this? And sometimes you have to realize with a lot of modern art movements, it's not so much what the end product looks like as it's the ideas that they're trying to express. So Pete Mondrian wanted to simplify things. He wanted to just break an object down into its simplest form. And when you do that, you get a rectangle. And even when you're learning how to draw, and you're looking at a complex like objects such as like a person, for instance. I, as an art teacher, even go break it down into simple shapes, and I'll either say rectangles, circles, or triangles, right? And everything can be kind of reduced to that basic shape. And then from there, you add complexity. So Pete Mondrian said, okay, well, let's just make everything reduced down to a rectangle. And so you have a lot of different rectangles and you get this very grid form. But it was his way to kind of create this simple, modern, pure, not distracted or not chaotic or not, over elaborated or innate art. Okay. And so it focused on this idea of minimalism. And because everything was broken up into a rectangle, you have a lot of horizontal and vertical lines throughout. Okay. Then, and it doesn't matter if it was a painting or if it was a piece of furniture. Here you can see everything is broken down into simple rectangles. Then he also wanted to even focus on the colors of red, yellow, and blue. And you're thinking, well, why? Those are considered primary colors. They're the colors that can be found naturally on, in natural pigments. And then it's the combination of red, yellow, and blue that make up all of the other colors that exist. So if we're talking about reducing something to its most pure and simple form, well, red, yellow, and blue are its most pure and simple colors. You can't make a red, you can't make a blue, and you can't make a yellow. They exist, they're the starting colors. But they themselves make your green, your orange, your pinks, your purples, and every other color that you can think of. So that's staying true to this idea of, making everything a simplistic form. Okay, so this is De Stijl. And then that last one is Bauhaus style characteristics. And Bauhaus was not just about like paintings. And really, in fact, there weren't really paintings. There was graphic design, so like posters, there was architecture, and then there was like furniture. Okay, primarily being architecture. Okay, and the whole idea here was that form meets function. Hopefully, you've heard this term before, but they wanted to create beautiful, simple objects that were also utilitarian, such as architecture and furniture. If I'm going to sit in a chair, I want that chair to be treated like an art form, and I want to consider its lines and its shapes and the way that we, you know, sit in it and what would be the most comfortable, that sort of thing. If it's a building, I want to take a look at what's the purpose of the building and the function and how can I optimize that for the space. Okay. They also, kind of keeping with De Stijl, they wanted the less is more approach. They wanted simplicity. And so sometimes when we say less is more, that's the idea of minimalism, like very few objects, very few lines here. So, particularly with furniture, it's going to be very clean and simple. And how can I make a chair that doesn't seem bulky or heavy, but that seems light and airy and as minimal, like that takes up as minimal amount of space as possible. Okay. They did focus stylistically. Doesn't matter if it was a poster, architecture building, or a chair. They liked a lot of diagonal movement. So unlike De Stijl, that was all very gridded, you get a lot more like curvature and movement with the eye, or you get like the intersection, like this building here leads. It's not just one square, but it has multiple kind of square rectangles that intersect, and those then create movement throughout the space. If we're looking in design, a lot of times they stretch the letters so that the letters had this continuation of line as you have this diagonal, left and right, over here, crisscross, or you have circles that curve into other lines that then come around and circle back again. And then the text wasn't even like, the text also kind of layered and created on these diagonal paths, okay, so that we can see there. And then, of course, because of this minimal approach, they also limited the color palettes. A lot of times you might see it with the same idea of just still, with very simple like red, yellow, blue, or just like black and red, with your neutrals of your green. So it wasn't like super color heavy, okay? But some key artists there, if you're looking at this one, is Walter Gropius and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Okay, so hopefully this gives you an overview. Add those characteristics a little bit to your overall writing. And then lastly, you needed to make sure that you gave the influences. So definitely look at the artwork, figure out why did, who or what influenced Pete Mondrian to come up with this grid idea, or what does this particular title mean? Or same thing with Bauhaus, figure out why. So do a little bit more investigation to get that why answered. Okay, that's it. And you guys have a wonderful day.